I think Apple pulled an oopsie, because apparently there's some read and write problems with the M2 MacBook Pros. If you didn't have enough of us telling you it's not worth it and you shouldn't buy it, maybe this video will convince you even further. But I'm going to approach it with a bit more of an Apple sheep eye and just say, I think Apple pulled the right decision here. Let's begin. I have a complicated opinion on this subject, okay? So you're just gonna have to be quiet and hear me out for a second, because Apple had a difficult decision to make, right? And in case you weren't aware, there is a chip shortage going on right now that is affecting all different kinds of supply chains, and that includes Apple, and that's why we've had so many back orders for the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros for months and months and months. So many people are confused and concerned as to why, after 8 months, it still takes multiple months for you to get one of these MacBooks when you put an order in through Apple. So this is obviously not a great position to be in for Apple, because they don't get to report as much revenue on their quarterly reports, and they're not used to having these back orders. They're not used to having supply chain issues where it takes a long time to build as many orders as there are coming in. So they decided to prioritize manufacturing efficiency to simplify the MacBook Pro design, and it does come at the cost of performance. So MaxTech did a great job breaking down why the M2 MacBook Pro is slower and how much slower it is. In read speeds, it seems to be around 50% slower, or in write speeds, it seems to be about 30% slower, depending on what your workflow is between exporting in Lightroom and Final Cut, or multitasking and that kind of stuff. But before, with the M1 MacBook Pro, they had two 128 gig NAND flash drives on the inside, which when you have two of those drives, you can basically read and write quite a bit efficiently and pretty fast. But Apple rarely gets to use those two 128 gig NAND drives, because there's only so many laptops that are shipping with 256 gigs now. You know, on the other MacBook Pros, 256 gig is the bare minimum, because two of those make a 512, and then if you want to do a 1 terabyte option, you can have two 512 gig NANDs. And then if you want a 2 terabyte, you can have two 1 terabyte NANDs. So they're very scalable when you go above the 128 gig configuration. The 256 gig NANDs and the 512 gig NANDs get a lot of use, and they get put in all kinds of different storage configurations across the MacBook Pro lineup, depending on which one you're upgrading to. But those entry-level models, those cheaper end that start with 250 gigs of storage, I think it's pretty clear that it was going to help Apple a lot if they didn't have to continue manufacturing these 128 gig NAND flash storage devices, because they don't use those on anything else. They don't really double up, and because there's so many people already buying the 512 gig MacBooks or 1 terabyte MacBooks, they had plenty of 256 gigs to go around. So to simplify chip production and to ensure they could deliver on an adequate supply of MacBook Pros, they decided that with the M2 generation, they were just going to ship one 256 gig NAND flash storage device, but that did come at the cost of slower read and write speeds from the M1 chip. So you still have the extra GPU cores, you still have some of that extra performance gains of the M2, which granted are not particularly high because it's still the 5nm process, and essentially it's kind of a beefed up M1 chip, because yes, it can perform faster than M1, but it also pulls more power to achieve that, so it's not particularly more efficient, which means if you already have an M1 MacBook Pro, you probably don't need to upgrade to the M2 chip, particularly if you're the kind of person to go with the base storage configuration. So why am I okay with this? Why am I not mad at Apple for doing this? You know, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know I get angry and rant on Apple pretty frequently, but the reason I think this is the okay decision to make is, for one, I didn't recommend this MacBook Pro in the first place, and I'm not just talking about the M2 version. Even back when the M1 MacBook Pro first came out, I found, after seeing the real-life use cases of comparing it to the M1 and the MacBook Air, and comparing it to the M1 and the 24-inch iMac and the M1 and the Mac Mini, having a different cooling structure honestly did not result in that big a difference in export tests and even sustained workloads. I found that the M1 MacBook Air was incredibly fast, very, very capable, despite not having a fan. So my logic was, if you want an M1 equipped laptop and you don't want to spend, you know, $2,000 on the mini LED MacBooks, just get the M1 MacBook Air. I think that the Pro terminology is really just marketing, especially now that Apple is putting the exact same chips in the MacBook Air as they are the Pro. The Air was cheaper and the Air was still plenty fast, and yeah, okay, the battery life on the MacBook Pro is a little bit better, but in my view, battery life is such a volatile stat on MacBooks. It varies so much depending on what you're doing that it's not going to enable some other workflow. Like, oh, now you can go on a a trip or do this one thing with the M1 MacBook Pro because the battery life is so good compared to the M1 MacBook Air. It's like, no, on trips you're still gonna pack a charger, and if you're doing sustained workloads, you better have a battery bank or a wall outlet ready, because these laptops, even when they have huge battery packs in them, will consume a lot of power under sustained loads. So I wasn't even recommending people buy the M1 MacBook Pro, and now that the M2 MacBook Air is about to launch, and that's so much better, even with the price hike. Yeah, it's got the new design, it's got a bigger, brighter display, it's got MagSafe, so the port selection is better. Absolutely, just like when I said the M2 MacBook Air is the better buy, and the M2 MacBook Pro is just a trick. It's basically living off of that MacBook Pro name, and I think the only reason it sells so well, at least according to Apple, it's their second best-selling Mac, is because people like that term. It's the word Pro. I don't think it's actually a bunch of people out there saying, oh yeah, I can utilize that extra performance gain when the fan is spinning on the inside, or that extra battery life really makes a difference. It's just, no, when you hear MacBook Air, that makes it sound thin and light and, oh, you know, that's like a cheap, thin, basic laptop for students. I'm a pro. I need a high-end workflow, but oh my god, $2,000, that's way too much. Oh wait, the MacBook Pro starts at $1,300? Okay, that's a pro one. I'm a pro. I'm doing pro stuff with my laptop. I'll buy that one. It's weird, but it works. A lot of people buy that laptop, despite tons of YouTubers and tons of articles saying, yeah, it's probably really not worth it unless you're just a diehard Touch Bar fan. So the fact that Apple is willing to compromise with mass production and try to catch up with demand and say, you know what, on the base model MacBook Pro, okay, so these read and write issues aren't an issue with the 512 gig version or the 1 terabyte version. If you get more than 256 gigs, no, it's not going to be slower. Basically, they use the same flash storage as before, but the people buying that entry-level MacBook Pro that are comfortable getting only 256 gigs of storage, Apple's probably right that the majority of those buyers are really not going to notice or care about read and write speed. They're not buying this thing because they're doing massive workloads or writing and reading data at insane volumes. Like, yeah, they do it occasionally, but if your workflow requires that amount of flash storage to transfer files back and forth, then I think you're more likely to buy at least the 512 gigs of storage, or if you're that much of a pro, you're probably already buying the 14-inch or 16-inch MacBook Pros, because once you start speccing out an M2 MacBook Pro, you're getting close to the price of those certified refurbished 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros anyway. A lot of people buying that base model MacBook Pro are just buying it for the name. It's that iconic, recognizable, oh, this is a Pro. And it doesn't matter that the port selection is worse than the MacBook Air. It doesn't matter that the design is dated. It doesn't matter that it's missing all of these Pro ports and Pro features that all the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros are rocking. The only reason they don't call that MacBook just the regular MacBook is because whenever Apple tried to do that, it never particularly sold very well. But whenever they attach that Pro naming to something, it just sparks a fire in someone's brain that, oh yeah, this is the Pro one. This one must be faster. Even if it's rocking the exact same silicon as the MacBook Air. That doesn't scare people away. So if you do care about read and write speed, I'm glad this information is out there, and I'm glad Max Tech broke down the information, because it really doubles down on the idea that, yeah, you shouldn't be buying the M2 MacBook Pro, but even if Apple changed nothing with the NAND flash storage, and it was the exact same as the M1 MacBook Pro before, I still wouldn't recommend it. I'd still say the M2 MacBook Air is the better buy. So if you're a diehard Touch Bar fan and you're upset about this and you really just need every ounce of battery life out of your laptop, but you're also not willing to stretch for the bigger MacBook Pros, then I guess, yeah, the 256 gig M2 MacBook Pro is not a good buy, and you should just chill out a little bit extra money for the 512 gig variant, or better yet, find an M1 MacBook Pro on sale. They're available certified refurbished on Amazon all the time. They're discounted. You can find them at Best Buy for cheaper. And frankly, the performance between the M1 and M2 is not that big. And I really wasn't expecting it to be, because it's the same kind of upgrade you should expect from iPhone CPUs year over year, you know? Like, we weren't expecting a big jump from A13 to A14 or A14 to A15. They're just incremental little changes. They're not supposed to be year over year upgrades like, oh my god, this is such a massive upgrade, you gotta buy it. No, I think Apple's comfortable with the idea of you upgrading every 4 or 5 years, and there's probably a lot of people that are going to be upgrading to the M2 MacBook Pro, even the base model with the slower read and write speeds, but they're going to be coming from like a 2015 or 2014 MacBook Pro. And yes, even though it's only going to have the 256 gig NAND flash storage, that's still going to be faster than what they had. So while it's going to make a lot of headlines and it's going to tick off a bunch of YouTubers that love reviewing each and every generation, and it's disappointing to see a regression in one year, considering the supply chain issues and considering the backorder and nightmare of production they're going through with the high-end MacBook Pros. I totally get why they did this, because the average consumer is not going to notice or care. They're just buying it because they think, oh, it's a pro device, and if there's real pros out there that actually take advantage of their laptops for transferring large files or exporting lots of content frequently, those people, they're going to buy higher storage configurations anyway. So it's a bit disappointing, and yes, it absolutely puts an even bigger red flag on the M2 MacBook Pro, but at the end of the day, did Apple make the right choice in this decision? I'm gonna say yeah, and you're welcome to disagree with me, because I know I'll probably get a lot of flack for this one, but feel free to leave your grievances and disagreements down in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I'll see you all in the next one.